Welcome to the Left of Str8 Show, where we talk entertainment, music, books, foodies, and more each week with special guest interviews of interest to the LGBTQ community and our straight allies. Direct from the entertainment capital of Northeast Ohio. Your host, Scott Fullerton, chats with some of your favorite entertainers, celebrities, newsmakers, and behind-the-scenes people across the country and around the world who make it all happen. So sit back, grab your favorite beverage, and let's start talking.
Everybody, welcome back to the Left of Str8 Show, where we talk all things entertainment, foodies, books, music, and advocacy for our LGBTQ plus communities and our straight allies. Today, my friends, it's all about the plus as we are celebrating Pride Month. I'm your host, as always, Scott Fullerton, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm so honored to have with us today the insightful and pioneering host of the Multiamory podcast. Dedeker Winston, Emily Sotelo-Matlack, and Jase Lindgren are here. This dynamic trio has been enlightening audiences since 2014, offering new perspectives on relationships, love, and the complexities of non-monogamy. Through the weekly episodes, they provide advice, answer questions, and discuss experiences on multiple forms of love and relationships. In over 420 episodes and 3.5 million episodes downloaded, and with a brand new book that just launched last month, they probably heard about it, talked about it, or maybe just happened to seen it all. From Emily and Jase's journey from being a couple and opening themselves up to polyamory and then parting ways, to Dedeker's thoughtful discourse on various subjects, their personal journeys have been as multifaceted as the topics they discuss. The spirit of Multiamory community is one of openness, caring, and support, embodying the idea of learning and growing together, which is just one of the conversations I want to bring to Pride Month here in the Left of Str8 Show. So please welcome to the show for the very first time, Dedeker, Emily, and Jase. Guys, how are we doing today?
Wonderful.
Doing great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show. I wasn't too involved with your podcast before. I hadn't seen too many episodes, but we had a great friend introduce us, and amazing work you guys have been doing. I can't believe it's going to be 10 years next year. Can you guys?
I
No.
know.
It's nuts.
Well, because you're also like a podcasting veteran yourself, right, Scott?
Little later than you, 2015, but yeah, it's a little work to get there.
It's
Oh,
100
yeah.
years in podcasting world.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like dog years, right? Like it's for such a relatively new medium of podcasting. Like it's wild how much the medium has changed, how much the landscape has changed, and it's cool to be a part of that, to be able to look back and see how things have changed since then.
Definitely. I feel the same way. I mean, you just kind of see all the different changes that happen in technology. And then, of course, when we started out social media, you could actually find guests on social media. People would talk to you back in the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's used for so many things out there. Let's go ahead and start out by getting to know you guys each a little better separately, and then we'll bring you all together as a group. I'd love to kind of know what kind of a kid were you growing up? Where did you grow up? And were you raised in a sex-positive environment, or did you never really talk about it before? So, Emily, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, goodness. I'm a little bit different than the two of them. I grew up in a household where my mom and dad were never married. I was born out of wedlock. My mom and dad had an affair, and then here I am today. So it was a single mother growing up, and I also lived with my grandmother. I'm from Tucson, Arizona, which is a fun place to grow up for sure, and a fun place to go back and visit. But yeah, I think a little column A, a little column B in terms of the sex positive nature of me growing up. I was able to talk about sex, but I think there was still a little bit of like internalized maybe sex negativity / internalized homophobia that just sort of comes out, I think, a lot as you're growing up, maybe as a person in the 90s or before that as well. that sometimes parents have a little bit of that, and they can mature and grow as their daughter does a lot of sex positivity work and is also coming out as bisexual and things along those lines. But yeah, it's interesting. I think I so appreciate the fact that like my parental figure that is still so involved in my life has evolved a lot as I've changed and grown over the years. And I think that's a really important thing, that people who are a little bit older, if they're willing and able to recognize like, hey, maybe I had some thoughts that I shouldn't be having, or maybe I was a little more bigoted in some ways than I should have been, and I want to change that. I think that's really, really important and awesome to see that.
Sure, that's great to hear. An amazing journey to watch happen, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Dedeker, talk about your journey if you can.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Northern California to a family that was very conservative Republican and also evangelical Christian. And so here I am today, talk about journeys to witness. Yeah, so of course, when I was growing up, everything that I knew about sex, about relationships, about sexuality pretty much all came from my Christian schooling and from the church, which is a very, very particular narrative that, I mean, somehow, like when I was maybe 16 or so, I think because I had an older sister in college who kind of smuggled me a bunch of like secular books. And like when I'd go visit her, she would like show me like drag queen movies and things like that. Like she was kind of this slow drip of quote unquote bad influence that I think exposed me to all the different ways that sexuality could look, for instance, or the ways that relationships could look. Right. So yeah, I mean, and it is a funny thing, I guess, to piggyback off of what Emily was sharing. I've sort of had a similar experience with my own mother in particular, in the sense that my family, despite still being maybe not as Christian, but still pretty conservative and fairly traditional, I've never had a situation where, you know, anyone threatened to disown me or to like stop talking to me or stuff like that. I've had a lot of family members very confused, very distressed, asking a lot of questions, expressing a lot of concerns. But ultimately, at the end of the day, especially my mom, the way that I put it is I don't think my mom is ever going to be the person to wave the queer pride flag. She's never going to be the person to wave the polyamory pride flag, but she is going to wave like her own daughter pride flag, as it were. Like that's what's most important. So that is a pretty fortunate place to be.
Definitely, to have a supportive mom that you know is there for you, even if they don't quite understand your journey, then to have the kind of a rebel sister with a cause there, that's always really nice to have in your corner.
And the irony is my sister also grew up to be very, very traditional and also Christian. You know, like she did the whole house with the picket fence, 2.5 kids, very traditional job, even though she was the one who kind of led me to the dark side in the first place.
I love that. Jase, what's your journey, my friend?
Yeah, so we moved around a lot when I was a kid. I was born in Wisconsin, but then lived in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, and then my parents got divorced and grew up mostly in the Seattle area because my mom's like a third-generation Seattleite, so we moved back to be where her family is. And my dad moved to Iowa to be a college professor, so then I would go back and forth, you know, between those two places growing up. And yeah, I was a dorky little artsy kid, and I had like, ironically, glasses kind of similar to the ones I have now that are kind of like the sort of, what's the word? Like kind of the aviator shape, you know, slightly larger, but it was real dorky at the time when I was wearing them because small glasses were cool. And, you know, anyway, things come back around.
We have to grow into our hipness, right? There we go.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But yeah, let's see. As far as sex positivity goes, also grew up in a Christian family, less conservative than Dedeker's family, but still, you know, on kind of the mainstream Christian side of things of, you know, I remember there was a time where I had some of my friends over. We were, you know, playing Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. And at one point I was sitting in my room with one of my guy friends and like had my head kind of on his shoulder or something. And, you know, my parents came down and, you know, were talking about snacks or some other thing, but then later kind of had this conversation with me about like, so, you know, we saw you with your friend Brian and, you know, you were kind of cuddling a little bit and, you know, like, we'll still love you no matter what. But, you know, if you were with guys, do you think maybe that makes God sad? And, you know, so it was like, they were like kind of trying, but, you know, they were, to their credit, I guess, similar to Emily's and Dedeker's parents. I mean, both of my parents have come a very long way from their own upbringings of, you know, missionary parents and stuff like that. And a lot of my cousins and relatives on both sides are still very much in that like missionary, religious, Protestant kind of way of being. So to their credit, they've come a long way since then. But it was a journey that I think my younger brother and I kind of had to drag them along a little bit, at least my mom kind of having to drag her into reconsidering some of the beliefs that she'd just been drilled into her so hard growing up that it was hard for her to let go of. But she's been great. And also, you know, similarly, never any doubt about my parents' love for us as kids, regardless of how we were challenging some of the stuff that they were raised with.
I think that's so important. I think it's probably a testament to why you guys can talk about it as openly, as freely as you do, is because there wasn't that super negative stereotype. It was kind of seen maybe a little different, but you didn't have any of that super positive negative reinforcement that would make it really hard to talk about later in life. Because a lot of us are still embarrassed to talk about it to this day, right? And then, depending on how your upbringing was with your family. Another question I have for all of you individually, one of the questions I ask a first-time guests on the show is usually when they kind of first came out to themselves and when they find their tribe, where do they find their tribe at? But I'm kind of interested in your guys' take on that question, because I feel you guys have a little more insight into there more being fluidity into that maybe. And how would you kind of describe finding your tribes, or is that a constantly evolving thing? How would you go ahead and describe that as your journey? And Dedeker, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, so I guess there's maybe two moments. So if we want to talk about sexuality, for me it was Barbara. Barbara was 16 when I was 13, and it was such a funny thing because, as I said, I was raised really conservative Christian, and in that world, you know, of course, the narrative is that being any form of non-straight is bad. And also, even to the extent of like, that doesn't really exist. So it's like the people who quote unquote think that they're gay or think that they're bisexual, like that's not true. Like they're lying to themselves, or it's something else. Right. And so at that tender age, when I was 13, you know, I knew that I was attracted to boys because that was encouraged. And then the first time I ever had a crush on this girl, on Barbara, who I just like didn't know how to talk to, I just like stared at, and I'm pretty sure like really creeped her out because I was just like staring at her constantly. In my little brain, it was so hard to understand what was going on because I already had this narrative like, okay, if I'm obsessed with a boy, it's a crush. That's what's going on. But like if I'm obsessed with a girl, you know, I just been told that doesn't exist. And so I was so confused of like, I don't know why I'm so obsessed with this girl. I don't get it. Like I just keep wanting to look at her and I don't understand why. So it was this weird thing where it took me actually quite a few years to then look back in retrospect and be like, oh, I think that was maybe my bisexual awakening way back in the day, you know, because now when I look back at it, I'm like, yes, like that, it was totally the same exact like kind of crush feelings that I would have had for a boy, just it happened to be for a girl, but there was no one there telling me, yes, these are like the same feelings, right? So I think that was the moment for me. And then when you add something like non-monogamy or polyamory into the picture, you know, sometimes, not all the time and not everybody, but many people do experience a little bit of that coming out, that awakening, that realization, you know, that coming out to themselves moment that happens. And mine was very long and protracted in the sense that actually probably around the same time, 13, 14 was the first time I noticed, oh, I'm able to be attracted to multiple people at once, even when I'm in a relationship, and I feel a draw to want to be in relationship with multiple people. And again, there was no one there telling me that that's normal, that even if you are monogamous, that's also normal to experience, you know, like attraction to more than one person. And so for me, it didn't take until I was in my early 20s. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s when my best friend suggested to me, hey, have you considered trying an open relationship, because I'd already been talking to him for so long about my frustrations and like getting crushes on people, even though I'm monogamous, you know, yada, yada, yada. And I was actually really offended at his suggestion at the time, because my association was like, open relationships are for people who are sex addicts or people who are not committed to their partner, don't actually love their partner, right? And so I was offended, but I still went home and like Googled it and like tried to find every book that I could, because as I started reading and uncovering more information and like reading these dusty live journal entries in the darkest corners of the internet, realizing, oh my God, like there's people who are doing this and they're doing it in a way that's consensual and functional, and people are actually happy doing this. And oh my God, is this what I've been feeling my entire life? Right. So I think even from there, it still took a couple of years of exploration, because of course there's still the doubt. There's everyone who's trying to tell you, oh, it's just because you haven't found the right person, or, oh, it's just because you're dating around, like, oh no, you're going to be monogamous eventually. So there was still, I think, some socially planted seeds of doubt before I did finally, you know, realize like, no, this is just who I am. I'm polyamorous. Right. And for me, there was a turning point that when I started actually saying that to people, putting that on my dating profiles, like just being upfront about that was kind of when the tribe and the community started to show up. That was when I started finding the people who were living, or at least wanting to live, on the same wavelength. So those were my multiple turning points.
I love that. And Jase, I want to hear about yours. And also, I mean, listening to your guys' podcast, you guys are great in telling, there's so many opportunities now to find tribes these days, right?
Oh,
With
yeah.
the advent of the internet and everything. So talk about your journey and what your kind of advice is to others to kind of find tribes.
Yeah, gosh, what a question. So as far as my own journey, I think there were also a lot of kind of different separate awakenings. There was, for me, kind of the initial, you know, as a young kid being like, okay, I've learned this stuff about homosexuality, but it just doesn't make sense to me with how I perceived how God should work. And like, you know, I was fortunate enough to have some you know, gay men that I really looked up to in my life, even if I wasn't like close with them, but, you know, had some friends, had people I looked up to kind of be like, no, this thing I've heard, that can't be right. Like, that can't be right, because these people are really cool and I want to be like these people. So like, what's up with that? And then I think then later in college, it was more of this realizing that there was a group of Christians who were not like that. And so for me, that was that next part of learning that there's really nothing about that in the Bible, you know, sort of, kind of. And this is something I've spent a lot more time, you know, reading about and learning about at that time, but kind of trying to reconcile those two things. And then later it was kind of being like, actually, you know what, I'm going to let go of this whole Christianity thing, because I you know, now I kind of don't think that's even worth saving. At that point. And so, you know, kind of had these like periods of different journeys. And then for me, the non-monogamy one was, I went from being someone who self-identified as a very jealous, possessive person and then in college, my senior year of college, I read the book Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. And it blew the doors off of my reality in terms of thinking about jealousy and possessiveness, in terms of having multiple partners and things like that. And I do want to give the caveat. I don't know if you've read the book, Scott, but
I need to.
I think it's worth reading because it's a classic in the science fiction genre and was a really influential book. That said, it does not hold up very well today. It's even though he was ahead of his time, still like a lot of sexism in it, because it was written in the 50s, right? So it's a product of its time, even if it was ahead of its time, I guess. So just as a fair warning there, I don't recommend the book to people that much these days, unless they are a fan of classic science fiction. But anyway, it just presented this different way of thinking about jealousy and thinking about love as not being tied to jealousy, and that they're kind of separate things. And that was just, it was like that overnight. I felt differently about it. And from then, for the next several years in my relationships, would, if the other person was into it, have a little bit of openness, like maybe have some threesomes or some kind of, we can see other people at certain times, or a hall pass kind of system, or, you know, experimented with different things, and was also would date multiple people at different times in that kind of non-exclusive way that people do, but I would actually be more upfront and clear about that's what I'm doing. And it wasn't until much later, once I was in the relationship with Emily, that we ended up opening up, and through that process learning about polyamory, that it was like, oh, there's people that actually do this, right? That make this work and make this sustainable. And it's not just, oh, this thing that I eventually have to get over, or maybe that I wish could be the reality, but it's not. It's like, oh no, there actually are people that live this way and make it work. And I guess my last one funny story I realized looking back is that when I was in college, around that same time that I had that awakening, I was in a bookstore, and I remembered seeing the book The Ethical Slut on the bookshelf. And that's like the quintessential original polyamory book, I think. And saw it there, flipped to their sections on threesomes, you know, like read a little bit about that, because that's what we were doing at the time. But then was like, I don't know, but like slut though, I can't read a book that has that in the title. And so I put it down. And if I had bought it and read it then, I could have ended up there much sooner, potentially saved myself some heartache.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. I'd have that memory of seeing it on the bookshelf there and not buying it.
Wow. Gosh.
That's an awesome story. I love that. And then finish it up with talk about people finding their tribes and good ways to find their tribe.
Oh, right. Yeah. As far as that goes, I think the internet is a blessing and a curse, right? The blessing is that you have access to a much wider variety of people than you do just in person, right? If you think back to, okay, we can only meet the people in our town, you're going to be super limited by who you can connect with there. And of course, the internet opens up a lot more options. I think the downside of the internet is it's also a really easy place for people to be jerks, and a very easy place for people to try to build a community by focusing on who's not part of their community, and kind of like focusing on who do we alienate from this, who do we kick out, who do we think we're better than. And we've found, from our community that we have online, which we have a Facebook group and a Discord server that people can join if they become a patron of the show. And we found that I think the combination of having the community built around this podcast, as well as having a little bit more of a barrier to entry, that you have to be a patron to get into it, means that the quality of how people treat each other is a lot better. And we also work really hard to foster that. But we've had lots of people come and say, I tried to post about some thing I was struggling with non-monogamy in like the Reddit, not polyamory channel, or in some other Facebook group, and just everyone immediately attacked me and told me I was doing it wrong, or that it was my problem to deal with, and that, whatever it was, just feeling really not welcomed. So all that to say, don't get discouraged if you run into that in some communities. Like that unfortunately does happen. You may find that sticking with it, that community could still work out, because there's usually just like a few of those bad apples who want to shit on everybody so that they can feel good about themselves. But then the other big one is I really encourage people to try to find ways to meet people in person. And so, through something like Meetup, or if you have a local Facebook community or something that does in-person events, is to go to them, and go to them at least at first with the clear intention that I'm not here to try to date anybody, that I'm just here to meet people and see what this community is about. Because if you build that foundation, you're more likely to find great people to date later on, as well as having this support network and learning a lot and really building a community. But I think so often people can start from a place of, I want to find a good community to meet people to date. And they kind of get too hyper-focused on that and miss out on making some friendships, and kind of quickly burn through the few people interested in them. And then everyone else is like, ooh, this guy's a little bit of a creep, just coming in here to try to date or something like that.
Great advice. And yeah, a tribe is not just who you're dating, but a tribe is that community that supports you in that journey. So very well said. And Emily, talk about your journey, and also talk about have you found much tribality between the tribes when you try to go from one to the other, and talk about how that's come to pass, or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what you mean is that I've become monogamous again after being polyamorous for a period of time. I think I am extremely fortunate because I live in Los Angeles and all three of us live on the West Coast, which really are places that tend to be more open-minded than several parts of the middle of the country, for instance. So we are extremely fortunate to that end. Yeah, in terms of, I think like my journey into realizing and really accepting the fact that I was bisexual, I mean, if I look back, I know that I have been for basically forever, like watching True Lies as a kid and seeing Jamie Lee Curtis undulating on that bed. I mean, you know, who wouldn't
She's really hot.
want that? I know. And, you know, that and it just idealizing and looking at women as I was growing up and also being attracted to men and also being attracted to multiple people at once, all of those things going on. But really also trying to, I think, internally suppress that and never wanting to label myself, I am this, or I don't like labels or whatever. But there, I think, is a lot of freedom in being able to be honest with yourself about who it is that you are and what it is that you like and that you want. And I know that by becoming polyamorous, when Jase and I decided to open up our relationship, that was the first time when I really was truly able to express myself in all of those ways and have relationships with women and have threesomes and date multiple people and really understand what it's like to fulfill these things that I had been interested in for as long as I could remember. And that was really incredible. It was an incredible opportunity that I, you know, sincerely cherish. But I do think now, I mean, I'm in a monogamous relationship again with a man, and I don't know if I'll get to date again in the same way. I would like to think that I would be able to maybe open up in some way in the future, like have threesomes again or something, even if it's more of like a monogamish setting. I would call myself more ambi-amorous. Like polyamory is not necessarily my identity. I can be in relationship with a person in the format that best serves that relationship that I'm specifically in. Whereas I think Jase and Dedeker would very much view polyamory as their identity. And that's kind of a difference between us. But in terms of finding community, I mean, I think my community now so much has been built up around people that I've met doing this show, people that we've met in the non-monogamous community, and just the kind of open-minded, sex-positive community in general. But I think community is also the people really close to you, the chosen family that you have and that you create. And that isn't just your, you know, nuclear family or the people that you are person that you are dating maybe in your immediate family, but the people that are closest to you that are your friends as well, or a really cherished uncle or a cherished, you know, godfather or something along those lines. That it can mean anything. It can mean so much. So I think especially as somebody who doesn't have a lot of immediate family in my life, having that chosen family has been extremely beneficial and necessary to me. And I think a lot of people in the LGBTQ community also would agree with that.
Definitely. I agree 100%. Well, thank you guys all for that. I don't want to go too much into how the podcast started and how you guys got together because we have a limited amount of time. I hope they'll just listen to your podcast because you guys have an excellent camaraderie between you, and that's a story for another day. But let's get into some nuts and bolts because you guys give some excellent information, and I keep staring at my mother over my shoulder and want to drop her picture down as we talk for a second. But I'm fighting the urge here. Let's start with some regular definitions. I mean, a lot of people don't understand terms, and that's where people get hung up on trans and polyamory and this and that. How would you guys best describe polyamory, and what do you think maybe the biggest misconceptions are about sexuality at this point?
Do you want to take that one, Jase?
No, go for it.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So just a really quick, very, very, very quick rundown of terms. So if we think about this big umbrella term of non-monogamy, And this is hard because it's essentially defining something by what it's not, right? And it's right there, as it says on the tin, non-monogamy is a label that applies to a wide variety of relationship practices that are not traditional monogamy, and traditional monogamy being the expectation that you meet one person, you get into an exclusive relationship with that person that is romantically exclusive, sexually exclusive, financially exclusive, cohabitation exclusive, all of those things, right? So under the umbrella of non-monogamy, we have a lot of things. We have everything from swingers, or sometimes people call themselves, lifestylists, things like that, people who maybe practice emotional monogamy, but they choose to sexually play with others, in threesomes, group sex, going to a swingers resort, going on a swingers cruise, or just having friends that they hook up with on the weekend, all the way to the practice of polyamory, which is more focused on, the practice of having multiple romantic partners at once, with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved. And then those partners in turn may also have their own multiple romantic partners as well. And then there's a whole swath of other flavors and labels, from solo polyamory and relationship anarchy and kitchen table polyamory. And those are things that people can, dive into the internet to find more information about. But that's kind of generally what we're talking about when we're talking about non-monogamy.
And then to answer your... Sorry. To answer your question about some misconceptions, the one that I did want to throw out there about polyamory, that's the most common one we see, is that the misconception is based on what you'll see in the media, both in fictional media when you have polyamorous characters on shows, or in the nonfiction media of, some news story about this throuple in New Zealand who's doing whatever and having a kid or something like that. The big misconception is that it's about group relationships. And while that exists, the three of us were in a triad for a while. We use the word triad instead of throuple. But that exists. However, it's definitely the minority of polyamorous relationships. Most polyamorous people and polyamorous relationships are just two people in a relationship. And those two people are also in relationships with other people, right? It's kind of these interconnected dyads, these interconnected two-person relationships. And I say that's the biggest misconception, is people assume it's like, oh, do you have to get approval from all your partners if you're going to date this new person? It's like, they don't have to date them. That's not the way this works. It's not some kind of commune where they have to come and live with us out on the farm or something like that. That's definitely not the normal. It does happen, sure, but it's not typical of polyamory.
Gotcha. Well said. And Emily, like I said, you guys have done over 420 episodes. What have been some of the most challenging topics that you guys have come across to discuss with your listeners?
Goodness. Yeah, I think we're constantly refining and discussing things like boundaries, which came up actually in our episode that we just launched today, which was super fun. I think that's an ever evolving thing to discuss and talk about and refine as to how it is that you create better boundaries in your own relationships and how you're able to implement them in a healthy way, things along those lines. And just we try to look sometimes to our listeners as to what it is that they're interested in us talking about. And then also, things like avoiding people weaponizing the tools that we put out there. I think there's a lot of people that use things like therapy or just tools in general to more maybe kindly or more effectively do something unkind or uncool to their partner. And we always have a saying, don't weaponize that shit. And we say that a lot in our book as well, because, it can all be well and good if you come to a relationship with tools wanting to grow and wanting to foster better communication. But there are people that really just aren't interested in that, and they use those tools for bad things as well. So I think we discuss that a lot on the show, and really try to tell people, like, please use these tools for good, and please use what we talk about in a healthy manner as opposed to weaponizing and hurting one another with them.
Right, and that brings me to my next question. I'll go to Dedeker with this. I keep saying Dedeker instead of Dedeker.
Yeah, I know, it's cool. It makes me sound like I'm from a science fiction movie or something.
Tells it one too many times. Reading your bios and your Mario
Understand it.
Yeah.
But let's go into the podcast. Really does delve in some very personal topics. So, how do you guys maintain that balance between creating a safe space for your guests, but also pushing the envelope and asking some tough questions?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it really is a balance, you know, and it goes all the way back to when we were first creating the show that we had to have a serious talk about, do we use our real names or do we use pseudonyms, right? And I mean, this was back in 2014 where, you know, it wasn't like, I don't know, you know, things are just very different now than they were then. And it was a discussion we had to have about like, how personal are we going to get with this, right? How real are we going to get with this? Because at that time, literally the only other podcast about non-monogamy that existed, they had already been doing it since like 2007. So they had also been doing it a long time, and they use pseudonyms, and they use pseudonyms for very good reason. You know, both of them, you know, had jobs that were on the line, right? And I think especially back in 2007, it was even more risky, the idea that you might bring in your sexuality or relationship format into a job. You know, but we had this very specific moment of deciding, no, we are going to use our real names, knowing that like this is going to be on the internet forever, and like this is going to be associated with us forever, even though our jobs may change, our family situations may change, you know, what type of relationship we're in may change. But part of it was like wanting to, by making it more personal, make it more normal, you know, not give that sense that, oh, this is a shameful thing that people need to hide, right? Because fortunately for us, all three of us at least had the privilege where we could be out without necessarily risking a job, without risking child custody, without risking housing, right? Those are all things that people still deal with today for being queer, trans, non-monogamous, all of the above, right? So that's part of it. And then as far as with our guests, we've tried from the beginning to be very much like a consent focused show when interviewing people. So that means a couple things. You know, we don't ever do any kind of gotcha style journalism, even though, trust me, sometimes we want to with some of our guests. You know, especially guests where maybe we don't really agree with their opinions or with their book or whatever it is, right? And then, you know, we also very much make sure that in the course of recording, like people are always free to be able to say, wait, actually, no, I don't think I want to answer that question, or actually, can you cut that out, or whatever, you know? Because we, like, already the queer community and the non-monogamous community have run into that tension of when mainstream coverage swoops in to try to understand this thing, and then sometimes not even from a malicious place end up completely misrepresenting who somebody is, or sometimes grossly misrepresenting who somebody is for the sake of sensationalism, right? And like, we have so many people that we know personally who got interviewed for a major news outlet, and then when the story comes out, they're like, they made me look like a total horrible, irresponsible asshole, right? Or they made me look like I was really jealous in this relationship when I'm not, right? And so I do think that for us, we want to be the opposite of that. You know, we want to create an interesting show. We want to hear people's personal stories. We want compelling interviews. We want to be able to share our own personal stories. And we also, we just want to be a force for representation that is a counterbalancing force of like the way mainstream media tends to cover these things, which fortunately, if we're looking at the way that non-monogamy is covered, that is getting better. We are starting to see more coverage that's more well-rounded, representation that's less two-dimensional. Like, it has gotten better, especially as we look back over just the last decade that we've been doing this. Is there anything there that I missed, Em and Jase?
No, I think
that's great.
That's it. Yeah.
No, I think it's very good. And I've listened to some episodes. Like I said, I thought you've handled some sensitive topics. I listened to the non-binary identities with Dara Hoffman. Thought that was handled very well. And you guys really do handle everything with care. And like you said, there's times where you're going to have controversial things I have to stop. As an entertainment podcast, I've had to stop for someone talk about a past drug abuse or someone they were with before that is not out. And so there's lots of landmines like that to deal from.
Sure.
Jase, what can you tell me is a memorable episode from the podcast that might have had more of a profound effect on you?
Ooh.
Wow. Gosh. I mean, I guess it's a nice segue to talk about our book a little bit, but there have been a number of episodes of the podcast where, we cover all sorts of different topics. And in some of them, we end up creating some kind of tool that's usually something that we'd been working on in our own lives that we kind of form and present to people to say, here's a way to kind of easily remember how to do this when it comes to communication or resolving conflict or something like that. And so the one that comes to mind for me is we did an episode several years ago about this way of doing a relationship check-in every month that was based on Agile Scrum. And any of your listeners right now who come from like a software background are going, oh God, no, not Agile Scrum. It's a methodology that was, is used pretty heavily in the software world, in the computer world, as a way to manage projects. But anyway, we took this idea from a blog and tried applying it to our own lives. And we did that for like a year before we put the episode out, where we talked about, this is what we've been doing, here's what we found. And then over the years, we've done a few more episodes where we refined that into our radar tool. And it's basically the structure for how to have these regular check-ins in your relationship. And the reason why I bring this one up is it's not like during the episode I had some kind of amazing epiphany or something, but more that actually doing that, like actually taking this tool that we put together and applying it in my life now for how long has it been? Probably 5 years of
like 7 years.
7 years.
Well, the Agile Scrum one came out a while ago, but yeah, the Radar one was in 2017 when we did that.
Yeah, so maybe 7 or 8 years of doing this in not only, my relationships with Emily and Dedeker, both, professionally and personally, but also in other relationships I've had, just like how much that one has stuck around and has been such an important part of approaching relationships intentionally and having a way to have important discussions with the people I'm in relationship with about our relationship that doesn't have to wait until something's wrong and then we need to have a talk, right? It's like, how can we do it so that our relationship talks can deal with some of that heavy stuff, but can also deal with, this thing was awesome, that, let's plan a trip coming up. I really liked that thing you did with your fingers last night. Like, let's do that again. Like, whatever it is, like being able to like work together and kind of be this team to continue iterating on your relationship and making it better. I just feel like as far as a lasting effect, that's been a pretty significant one. And of course, it's one of the tools in our book, which is, that's how we put the book together, was picking the 6 tools we've created that were the ones that both have stuck with us and that we reference a lot, and also that we've heard from our listeners, oh my gosh, this is the one that's changed everything for me.
Right. That's amazing. And we got to get into the book because I can't believe how much time we burned through already. And I could talk about, we're going to have you guys for a quarterly guest. I think this is an important topic to talk about, especially in my LGBTQ community plus. So Emily, let's go into this. I mean, Dedeker, she's done her Smart Girl's Guide to Polyamory and her courses. Yeah. So she's worked in books and things like this before. This is the first time you guys have done something together as a project. How was that, bringing that out together, and how was that working together as a team outside the podcast community and building a book together?
I mean, we're incredibly lucky that we've been doing this together for so long. Writing a book together, I think, was challenging in a lot of ways, but thankfully we were able to sort of understand that we had a cohesive voice already, and we were able to kind of implement that and put that together in this book. And the book is essentially a collection of our 6 tools that we use most often throughout the course of our podcast and doing this for almost a decade, these are the tools that we talk about over and over again, that our community has used and that we love to reference throughout our time on the show. So yeah, I mean, in terms of creating the book together, it was a great experience. Definitely challenging at times because, we had to like have moments of kill your darlings. You can't keep absolutely everything in the book. And there may have been a thing that I wrote that Dedeker was like, no, we maybe should cut that, or vice versa. But really by the end, like all three of us touched every single page of the book. And so it really is a very collective presentation, I think, that we're putting out to the world. And yeah, I'm just so excited that it's finally out there now.
That's amazing. Dedeker, from your perspective, having created courses and done a book before, what was it like to have these shoulders to lean on, so to speak, to get this thing brought together?
It was hard. Well, I mean, it was wonderful. Okay, I'll start with the hard stuff and then talk about the wonderful stuff. Yeah, hard stuff for me is that with my writing and also with literally everything else in my life, I'm very much a control freak. And so... And writing, honestly, it's a very solitary occupation, right? We're used to, I think, writing on our own. And especially when you think about someone who's a writer or someone who's written a book, like it's a very, very, you spend a lot of time alone, right? You spend a lot of time alone with your own thoughts, with your own process, for better or for worse. You develop your own neuroses around all of these things, right? And so then to switch into writing with these two, at first, yeah, it was challenging because I was kind of used to my own process, but then also like we had, 7 or 8 years already of experience of working with each other. So at least I knew at the end of the day that I can trust, when I'm getting critical feedback, for instance, or when someone is like, I don't think we should keep this in, where again, maybe it's like, oh yeah, that is something I want to keep. But I also trust that, like, I trust this perspective outside of me because I've trusted their perspective outside of me for like so many years, right? And I also trust that we can communicate. So it's like, if I really want to argue for why I want to keep this thing in, like we can have a good discussion about it where there's not too many hurt feelings or activated emotions or things at the end of the day. And so, I mean, the wonderful part then is also not as hard as writing a book by yourself. Not as many neuroses show up, So Anne Lamott, who is a really famous writer, she writes a lot about the process of writing. She talks about how when you're a solo writer, you're sitting there at your computer writing away, and it's like all your neuroses and ghosts from the past and inner critical voices like show up and just kind of put their chairs right behind yours and just like whisper at you the entire time. And I feel like co-writing meant that those voices were quieter, that maybe there were fewer of them. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's kind of like we all brought our own neuroses and they all kind of battled each other out and canceled each other out or something like that. But I felt
Whatever
more
works.
like having tangible human beings there to ask questions of, or to be like, I really like this part, or, oh God, I hate this part, or what do you think about this part? And to have their feedback instead of the feedback of my own neuroses, I think was probably the best part of the writing process. And so ultimately we create something that, for better or for worse, I can't take 100% credit for, but like I kind of get to share that with this team, and that I hope that it's kind of something that's better than the sum of its parts.
There you go. Amazing. And Jase, you guys have been on a tour together doing like bringing a question and answer and discussions before. The three of you traveled to 10 cities or something. You've also brought this book this last week. You've gone to both Seattle and Los Angeles. How does that face-to-face meeting compare to talking on the radio? How exciting is that?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm sure you can relate, but one of the weird things about doing a podcast is you spend so much time kind of talking into this little black box, and you don't get to see how people are reacting. Are they laughing? Are they nodding? Are they shaking their head? Are they making a grumpy face? Like you don't know, because you're kind of doing it in advance, and then you put it out there and hope for the best. And, you get some feedback, but getting to do stuff in person is just, it's so cool on a lot of levels. One is when you're speaking, getting to see how people are responding to it and see what's resonating for people. And then getting to do that direct Q&A is so nice, because then, sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, they'll be talking about a topic. I'm like, yeah, this is really interesting. Oh man, but I wish they'd gone into that thing a little bit more. Being able to do it in person actually gives people that chance to ask those things, and then also to, get to hear each other, the answers to each other's questions as well. Just kind of brings that sense of community, even in that short-term little temporary community. You get that sense where, people will say to us afterwards something like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about this, but when that person asked that question and your answer made me realize that's what's going on in my relationship with my best friend. And I want to be incorporating more of that. And it's just the way we can all help each other when we're together is, I think, easier to do in person. Maybe harder to reach as many people at the same time in person, but there is just something so nice about that immediate feedback you get.
Agree. And it's very funny because I did the same thing. I started my podcast. Northeast Ohio is not the entertainment hub of LGBT community, obviously. So after my first year of doing my podcast, I went to Mickey's in West Hollywood and had a big party for all my guests that I had over the previous year, so I can actually talk to people in person. So I hope you went upstairs because Mickey's very loud downstairs. So
yes,
absolutely. It's nice and intimate up there.
Symbiotic moment we had here.
Yeah,
indeed.
Emily, talk about, we got to wrap things up here. So I want you to talk about the website, let them know where they can find the website, what kind of things they can find on it, and where they can track you guys down that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Our podcast, Multiamory, you can find on all podcast players everywhere. Yeah, Apple, iTunes, everything. Additionally, our website is www.multiamory.com. I like the fact that we have a search function on our website. So really, if you're interested in non-monogamy in any capacity, you can search for a topic. We also have a beginner's guide and a start here. So if you're curious about certain things like jealousy or polyamory 101, you can look stuff like that up. Additionally, our book, multiamory.com/book, you can order it there. You can order it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or independent booksellers. And then you can find us on Instagram at multiamory_podcast and Twitter and Facebook at Multiamory.
Amazing. And Jase, you talked about earlier, you guys have built this incredible community of patrons, over 1,400 strong. Talk about where they can find that and how they can have access to these special Facebook groups and things.
Yeah, absolutely. So for that right now, that's through our Patreon, which is at patreon.com/multiamory. And basically you can choose an amount to contribute there. And then as a thank you is how you get access to the Facebook group and the Discord server. I'm a big fan of Discord myself. For those of your listeners out there that are not already familiar with it, if you're familiar with something like Slack, it's kind of similar to that. It's basically a messaging platform where you can have a server where everyone connects. So that's our server. And then you have different channels that are about all sorts of different topics. And unlike Facebook, where everything's kind of threaded conversations and, Facebook's algorithm is what determines what you're going to see. What I really like about Discord is the fact that everything's in these different channels. So I'm pulling it up right now, and it's there's a whole channel that's just about parenting. There's one that's about gratitude and positivity. We have one that's all about regional events. So there's different threads for different parts of the world where you can connect with people. We have a book club. There's about movies and TV. We have a whole channel where people post pictures of their cute animals, all sorts of different things. And it's really cool to get that kind of interaction with a community, both in real time and that you can come and see what people have been up to.
That is awesome. And Dedeker, I'm going to give you the final word here. I want you to brag on your podcast a second, let everyone know what topics you might have coming up. And then you actually have a course on non-monogamy. Talk about that for a quick second.
We just recorded a fantastic episode with Dr. Heath Schekinger and Diana Adams. And so Dr. Schekinger is on the APA, so the American Psychological Association's relatively newly established task force for creating resources for consensual non-monogamy, specifically for mental health professionals. And then Diana Adams is a lawyer who works mainly in New York, but also internationally. And she, for many decades, has been advocating for legal protections and legal rights for polyamorous families and non-traditional family structures as well. Their work is amazing. We've been connected to them for several years, but we got to have them back on the show to talk about the work that they're doing right now, between things like legalizing domestic partnerships with multiple people in the city of Somerville, Massachusetts, specifically. All kinds of amazing things that they're doing to actually turn the tide as far as securing rights for all of us who don't follow the heterosexual married family model, right? Which is a lot of us. So definitely, if listeners are interested in that, please go check that out and check out their work. It's fantastic. We also regularly do listener Q&A episodes as well. So people in our Patreon community will submit questions about non-monogamy, about sexuality, about just what's going on in their relationships. And then we sound off on that. As far as my own course, so last year I launched an online self-paced course called Building a Solid Foundation for Non-Monogamy. And it is all based on Gottman Institute research. And the Gottman Institute, they've been operating out of Seattle for several years now. They're one of the foremost research institutes on relationship research, so if anyone is familiar with the concepts of, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of relationships, that's from the Gottman Institute. And unfortunately, the Gottman Institute has been pretty slow to the game as far as recognizing non-monogamy. I mean, I think their most recent book that came out a couple years ago finally acknowledged trans and gay people, so they're shifting, but very slowly. It's going to be quite a while before they're embracing non-monogamy. And so in my work, because I work with clients, with individuals, with couples, with triads, I'm Gottman Institute trained, and so I've had to do a lot of work translating their research and their tools into something that applies to non-monogamy as well. And so the course is all using their very wonderful research-backed tools and looking at them through a lens of non-monogamy and how their research can be best harnessed to create a better foundation for a non-monogamous relationship.
Fantastic. Well, Emily Sotelo-Matlack and Dedeker Winston and Jase Lindgren, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Left of Str8 Show today. We definitely have to have you back again. Thank you so much for popping in.
Thank you, Scott. Fantastic.
Congratulations on the book, guys. Be sure to look for that. It's Multiamory, Essential Tools for Modern Relationships. It's available now. And be sure to check back next Tuesday. We're going to have the group on for a little 5 questions with, as we do every Tuesday. We appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for listening to Left of Str8 Show. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Hey, everyone. Welcome to my Patreon page. I hope you're here to support the Left of Str8 Radio Network. We have been podcasting for 9 years now. We just celebrated our 8-year anniversary show on July 3rd, and we are in our 9th year. And I hope you'll help us continue to be on the air and support LGBTQ radio and our straight allies. We launched this Patreon page to help defray some of the costs for hosting and for video and for everything that we need on here. It would be my honor and privilege to get to know you all. I have 3 tiers on here to pledge. We don't want it to be a hardship for anybody, but if you can part with just a little bit money each month, it would really help support the radio show and the station. For just $3 a month, just the price of a cup of coffee, we're going to give you a huge thank you on the Left of Str8 website. Plus, I'm going to send you a personalized postcard from me for thanking in the effort. For just a little bit more, for $8 a month, what I call the price of coffee and a bagel each month, I also give you the first tier of the postcard and the shout out. And you also get to listen to all the episodes before anybody else, commercial free, along with an I Support LGBTQ Radio sticker and 10% off merchandise in our upcoming LGBT store for the Left of Str8 Radio. And then the third tier you can pledge to, if you can set aside money for coffee and lunch, just $13 a month. Besides everything in the first 2 tiers, you also have the opportunity to listen live in one of our live recordings, one of our interviews with a celebrity or personality from entertainment, foodies, books, music, or advocacy. You can ask some questions. You can get a special Left of Str8 Radio tote bag and 20% off merchandise in the upcoming store. So thank you for stopping by Patreon. I hope you will donate each month. And thanks for being a great supporter of LGBTQ radio and helping us keep on the air. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website, www.leftofstraightradio.com, for contests and other news and information. See you next week.